The authors of our race were aware that we should be intemperate in eating and drinking and take a good deal more than was necessary or proper by reason of gluttony. In order then that disease might not quickly destroy us, and lest our mortal race should perish without fulfilling its end, intending to provide against this, the gods made what is called the lower belly, to be a receptacle for the superfluous meat and drink, and formed the convolution of the bowels so that the food might be prevented from passing quickly through and compelling the body to require more food, thus producing insatiable gluttony and making the whole race an enemy to philosophy and music, and rebellious against the divinest element within us. The bones and flesh and other similar parts of us were made as follows. The first principle of all of them was the generation of the marrow. The marrow itself is created out of other materials. God took such of the primary triangles as were straight and smooth and were adapted by their perfection to produce fire and water and air and earth. These, I say, he separated from their kinds, and mingling them in due proportions with one another, made the marrow out of them to be a universal seed of the whole race of mankind. And in this seed he then planted and enclosed the souls, and in the original distribution gave to the marrow as many and various forms as the different kinds of souls were hereafter to receive. That which like a field was to receive the divine seed, he made round every way, and called that portion of the marrow brain, intending that, when an animal was perfected, the vessel containing this substance should be the head. But that which was intended to contain the remaining and mortal part of the soul he distributed into figures at once round and elongated, and he called them all by the name marrow. And to these, as to anchors, fastening the bonds of the whole soul, he proceeded to fashion around them the entire framework of our body, constructing for the marrow, first of all, a complete covering of bone. Bone was composed by him in the following manner. Out of this he fashioned, as in a lathe, a globe made of bone, which he placed around the brain, and in this he left a narrow opening, and around the marrow of the neck and back he formed vertebrae, which he placed under one another, like pivots, beginning at the head and extending through the whole of the trunk. Then again, considering that the bone would be too brittle and inflexible, and when heated and again cooled would soon mortify and destroy the seed within, having this in view, he contrived the sinews and the flesh, that so binding all the members together by the sinews, which admitted of being stretched and relaxed about the vertebrae, he might thus make the body capable of flexion and extension, while the flesh would serve as a protection against the summer heat and against the winter cold, and also against falls, softly and easily yielding to external bodies like articles made of felt, and containing in itself a warm moisture which in summer exudes and makes the surface damp, would impart a natural coolness to the whole body, and again in winter, by the help of this internal warmth, would form a very tolerable defense against the frost which surrounds it and attacks it from without. He who modelled us, considering these things, mixed earth with fire and water and blended them, and making a ferment of acid and salt, he mingled it with them and formed soft and succulent flesh. As for the sinews, he made them of a mixture of bone and unfermented flesh, attempered so as to be an amine, and gave them a yellow colour. Wherefore, the sinews have a firmer and more glutinous nature than flesh, but a softer and moister nature than the bones. With these God covered the bones and marrow, binding them together by sinews, and then enshrouded them all in an upper covering of flesh. The more living and sensitive of the bones he enclosed in the thinnest film of flesh, and those which had the least life within them in the thickest and most solid flesh. So again on the joints of the bones, where reason indicated that no more was required, he placed only a thin covering of flesh, that it might not interfere with the flexion of our bodies and make them unwieldy because difficult to move, and also that it might not, by being crowded and pressed and matted together, destroy sensation by reason of its hardness, and impair the memory and dull the edge of intelligence. Wherefore also the thighs and the shanks and the hips and the bones of the arms and the forearms and other parts which have no joints, and the inner bones which on account of the rarity of the soul in the marrow are destitute of reason. All these are abundantly provided with flesh, but such as have mind in them are in general less fleshy, except where the Creator has made some parts solely of flesh in order to give sensation, as for example the tongue. For the nature which comes into being and grows up in us by a law of necessity does not admit of the combination of solid bone and much flesh with acute perceptions. But our creators, considering whether they should make a longer-lived race, which was worse, or a shorter-lived race, which was better, came to the conclusion that every one ought to prefer a shorter span of life, which was better, to a longer one, which was worse. And therefore they covered the head with thin bone, but not with flesh and sinew, since it had no joints. And thus the head was added, having more wisdom and sensation than the rest of the body, but also being in every man far weaker. For these reasons, and after this manner, God placed the sinews at the extremity of the head in a circle round the neck, and glued them together by the principle of likeness, and fastened the extremities of the jawbones to them below the face, and the other sinews he dispersed throughout the body, fastening limb to limb. The framers of us framed the mouth as now arranged, having teeth and tongue and lips, with a view to the necessary, and the good contriving the way in for necessary purposes, the way out for the best purposes, for that is necessary which enters in and gives food to the body. But the river of speech which flows out of a man and ministers to the intelligence is the fairest and noblest of all streams. Still, the head could neither be left a bare frame of bones, on account of the extremes of heat and cold in the different seasons, nor yet be allowed to be wholly covered, and so become dull and senseless by reason of an overgrowth of flesh. The fleshy nature was not therefore wholly dried up, but a large sort of peel was parted off and remained over, which is now called the skin. The diversity of the sutures was caused by the power of the courses of the soul and of the food, and the more these struggled against one another, the more numerous they became, and fewer if the struggle were less violent. This skin the divine power pierced all round with fire, and out of the punctures which were thus made the moisture issued forth, and the liquid and heat which was pure came away. And a mixed part, which was composed of the same material as the skin and had a fineness equal to the punctures, was borne up by its own impulse and extended far outside the head. But being too slow to escape, it was thrust back by the external air and rolled up underneath the skin, where it took root. Wherefore the Creator formed the head hairy, making use of the causes which I have mentioned, and reflecting also that instead of flesh, the brain needed the hair to be a light covering, or guard, which would give shade in summer and shelter in winter, and at the same time would not impede our quickness of perception. From the combination of sinew, skin, and bone in the structure of the finger, there arises a triple compound which, when dried up, takes the form of one hard skin partaking of all three natures, and was fabricated by these second causes, but designed by mind, which is the principal cause with an eye to the future. For our creators well knew that women and other animals would someday be framed out of men, And they further knew that many animals would require the use of nails for many purposes. Wherefore they fashioned in men, at their first creation, the rudiments of nails. For this purpose and for these reasons, they cause skin, hair, and nails to grow at the extremities of the limbs.